Hey everyone, I'm Noelle Trent, the Director of Interpretation, Collections, and Education at the National Civil Rights Museum.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Jones, the museum educator at the National Civil Rights Museum.
So we are in the preparation of April 4th, the anniversary of Dr. King's passing. And like everybody else, we're affected by this global pandemic. So we're taking our conversations and our programming to the digital sphere. So we thought we would just share a few thoughts with you about this week that starts March 28th, leading to Dr. King's assassination on April 4th. And Brian, I think before we get to 1968, you know where I'm thinking we should start. I think we should start April 4th, 1967.
Yeah, that's exactly 1 year to the day of the tragedy. And you can argue that it's the last pilgrimage of Dr. King's life when he delivers his controversial Beyond Vietnam speech at the Riverside Church in New York City.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people know about that speech. It's this key moment in his career where he transitions from this nonviolence in a domestic civil rights kind of way to a very specific. I believe in nonviolence and I practice it and support it in a very broad way, and so it goes from domestic to international, and he's coming out against the Vietnam War.
Coming out against the Vietnam War in Dr. King's shoes at this time was heavily critical, specifically with his relationship with President Lyndon Johnson, who was viewed as an ally of the movement at this time by passing the Civil Rights Bill and Voting Rights Bill. It was also seen as unpatriotic with his comrades within the Civil Rights Movement. Other civil rights organizations criticized him for publicly speaking out against the war. And so what this does, though, is that it reminds us that before he's a civil rights leader, he is a man of the ministry, and his commitment and discipline of nonviolent resistance still held even after the successes of the modern civil rights movement.
When we look at people's opposition to his nonviolence internationally, and today we live in a very global world, and it seems a little, that it goes against the grain of things that we think about. But at the time, it was pretty controversial, and it's part of the conversation of the time. You know what I mean? Like, so there are slogans out there that no Viet Cong ever called me the N-word. So people are like, why do we need to be involved with this? There are plenty of issues to deal with at home. But I think what's really compelling for him is that he says, yes, but we also have to deal with these issues. I think one of my favorite quotes from that speech and the sentiment from that speech is that a nation that spends more on its military defense than on the well-being of its people is approaching spiritual doom. There's another quote that's like, is going to hell. And I think that says a lot about the radicalism and how much he believes in addressing these inequities and addressing the harm that's being done.
Look, for those that say that Martin Luther King Jr. was not woke, it's just not true. Martin Luther King Jr. was especially woke, especially at this particular period of his life. He had accomplished so much by this point, but it was not just civil rights. And I think one thing that really preempted him to speak out against the Vietnam War were the percentages of African American men specifically who were drafted at an alarming higher rate than whites were. And I felt that he thought that the injustice economically in the United States' own backyard versus what was going on internationally. We're spending billions and billions of dollars to this militarism in this war when there are people in this country who can work 90 to 100 hours a week and still qualify for government assistance. And so this was something that I think that was a faith driven through him, again, being a clergy, specifically in the South, and that he had no other option but to speak out against the war.
Another thing about the Vietnam War that people forget is that African Americans are being drafted at a high rate, Latinos, poor whites. This is the first war that is in people's homes. This is the first time war is televised. So you are sitting at your kitchen or your dining room table with your family in the evening, and you're seeing footage from the front lines, and you're seeing body counts. So they're publicizing how many lives are lost. There are public drafts where it's like the lottery, quite literally, where you would register, all men in the country over 18 have to register, but then they're calling out your number and you don't know whether or not you're going to be called. And, you could get a deferral in some instances if you were in college, but that wasn't always guaranteed through the run of the Vietnam War. And so I think people forget just how intrinsic the war was to how people were living at the time, and how much a part of it of their everyday life. So he was taking, yes, he took a risk, but like you said, he had a pulse on what was happening in the country.